60 Minutes Overtime.
This week on 60 Minutes, we check in again on a technology that has been developing and making astounding breakthroughs for 10 years and more. This is the technology of prosthetics. And this is you controlling the hand.
Sure is.
About 17 years ago, the Department of Defense spent $100 million to try to improve the prosthetics, the artificial arms, artificial legs that our troops have to rely on after catastrophic injury. For decades, they really hadn't improved very much, but with this DoD project called Revolutionizing Prosthetics, they have created amazing robotics. In 2009, we got our first look at a robotic hand by inventor Dean Kamen.
Well, this has 3 processors on it. Think of this as 3 PCs worth of computing power, and all of this just fits, it's round because it just fits in the wrist joint.
In terms of the engineering, what was the toughest piece of this?
All of it.
At that time, the prosthetics were controlled by the wearer shrugging his shoulders or even pushing buttons that were built into his shoes.
Use my toes to grasp this.
We got a look at this with Fred Downs, who was in charge of prosthetics for the Veterans Health Administration. He had lost part of his arm in Vietnam in 1968. You were skeptical.
Very, very skeptical. Because I've seen lots of inventions come along in my years of being in charge of prosthetics, and so some great stuff, but in the long run it doesn't really work because your body only has so much tolerance for gadgetry.
The holy grail in this project was to figure out some way that the brain could actually operate the prosthetic. And we got an amazing look at that about 10 years ago with a woman named Jan Sherman. She had a genetic disease that had severed the connection between her brain and the muscles of her body. She could really only move her face at the point that we saw her. But we saw that they had put computer ports into her skull that were connected to the motor cortex of her brain. The electrical signals from the brain flowed out to a computer and operated a robot hand. This was done at the University of Pittsburgh, where scientists and engineers were part of the Defense Department project.
I can move it up and straight down and left and right and diagonally. I can close it and open it, and I can go forward and back.
That is just the most astounding thing I've ever seen. 10 years ago, the technology had its limitations. Jan could really only open and close the robotic hand, and she had trouble picking up items.
Okay, I'm going to take the cone away. Just go ahead and close it.
Oh, sure.
So as soon as I take the cone away, there's no problem. But as soon as I put the cone there, she can't do it.
We're returning to this subject now because of an amazing breakthrough in the sense of touch. The brain control of the prosthetics has only gotten better and better, but now they have included sensors in the robot hand, for example, that sends the sense of touch back to the brain. We saw that with Brandon Prestwood, who lost his hand in an industrial accident several years ago. The prosthetic limb is connected to muscles in his arm and nerves in his arm so that he has motor control of the hand and can also feel the return of the sense of touch.
It really didn't take that long to adapt this. It feels like my left fingers, my left hand. When I'm asked to describe it, the word I use is tingling. That is my fingers. That's just the way they feel now. It's not a weird sensation to me. That's my fingers. When I'm doing tasks, instead of having to look all the time at something that I'm going to grab, I have that sensation. I know I'm touching my other fingers right now, looking at you. I know I'm touching them. It gives me back something I don't have.
We also met Scott Embry, a volunteer at a project at the University of Chicago. He lost some of his ability to move and feel sensation in an automobile accident. Now, the ports in his skull communicate the brain's intention to a robot arm, and then the sensors in the robot hand send the feeling of touch back into Embry's brain. We also met a young man named Austin Beggin. He became a quadriplegic after diving into a submerged sandbar, but now he's involved in some of the most fascinating research that we saw while shooting this story. Like Scott Embry, he has ports in his skull that connect to his brain, but unlike Scott Embry, the signals for motor control go not to a robot arm, but to his own arm, to sensors inside his arm that fire his muscles. This allowed Austin to do something that he hadn't been able to do in years, and that was shake his father's hand.
You can definitely feel the squeeze.
Yeah, I got a good
It is
grip of
amazing.
you. Yeah. I mean, it was the moment that kind of summed up to me why I even did this in the first place. I remember kind of my parents even asking me about this study. It's like, you know, what are you looking to get out of it? And I said a simple handshake. The amount of times someone's walked up to me and reached out and then felt, you know, embarrassed or awkward because they, you know, I can't reach back. It's like, all I've ever wanted to do is just shake someone's hand and just tell them, you know, hi. Getting that opportunity to do it with my dad, I mean, it was like saying thank you for the last 8 years of sticking this out with me and all the work that him and my mom have to do. First handshake in 8 years.